Captain Ethan Markson stood on the balcony of the human ship, looking out at the distant planet Veon. It was a beautiful sight, one that he would soon be leaving behind. The mission to establish peaceful relations with the Verlesians, the dominant alien species on Veon, had been successful. The humans had made their mark in the galaxy. But just as everything seemed to be going well, a sudden disaster struck. The ship rocked violently, throwing Ethan and the others to the ground. There was a sharp, tearing sound as alarms blared throughout the ship. Ethan quickly scrambled to his feet and made his way to the command center. He knew something was wrong. The Verlesians had been cooperative. There was no reason to expect an attack, or so he thought. Inside the command center, chaos reigned. Crew members scrambled to respond to the emergency. On the large screen at the front of the room, the image of the Verlesian ambassador Zalarin appeared, his face a mixture of concern and fear. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "What happened?" Ethan shouted, trying to be heard over the noise. "The Verlesians! They've been attacked!" The ship's commander, Captain Amelia Cole, said in a strained voice. "We don't know who did it, but they've ambushed us. The Verlesian ship is damaged. Zalarin is the only survivor." Ethan's stomach twisted. The Verlesians had been their allies, and now they were under attack. He felt a sense of responsibility for Zalarin. He couldn't just sit back and let his people suffer. He had to do something. "I'm going to help him," Ethan said, turning to the crew. "Prepare the rescue team. We're going down to Veon." Captain Cole looked at him with wide eyes.
"Are you sure? The planet is dangerous. We don't know what's waiting down there."
"I don't care," Ethan replied, his voice filled with determination.
"I'm not going to leave him behind."
Without waiting for a response, Ethan ran toward the docking bay. He didn't know what awaited him on Veon, but he knew he had to help.
He was the only one who could. The planet Veon was far more hostile than anyone had expected. The surface was rocky and barren, with jagged mountains reaching toward the sky. The air was thin, and the temperature was extreme. Yet, despite these challenges, it was home to the Verlesians, a species that had managed to thrive in such a harsh environment. Ethan's shuttle touched down on the surface with a soft thud. He stepped out into the hot, dry air, the dust swirling around him. The rescue team followed close behind, but there was no time for hesitation. The Verlesian ship was gone, and their ambassador, Zalarin, was out there somewhere. The group moved quickly through the rugged landscape. Ethan kept his eyes peeled, scanning the area for any signs of the ambassador. It didn't take long for them to find the wreckage of the Verlesian ship. The ship was a twisted mass of metal, smoke still rising from the burning remains. "Over here!" one of the crew members shouted. Ethan ran toward the sound of the voice, his heart pounding in his chest. When he reached the wreckage, he found Zalarin lying on the ground, his body limp and unmoving. His once pristine silver scales were now covered in dirt and blood. Ethan knelt beside him, checking for a pulse. He felt a weak thump against his fingers. Zalarin was alive, but barely. Ethan quickly signaled for the team to help lift the ambassador. They moved him carefully, making sure not to cause any more harm. "Get him to the shuttle," Ethan ordered. "We need to get him back to the ship now." The journey back was slow and tense. Zalarin's breathing was shallow, and Ethan couldn't help but feel a deep sense of guilt. This was his responsibility now. He had to protect the ambassador, even if it meant putting his own life at risk. Once they made it back to the shuttle, Ethan watched over Zalarin as the ship ascended, leaving the scorched landscape of Veon. As they flew toward the human ship, Ethan's mind raced. What had happened to cause this attack? Who would want to hurt the Verlesians? Back aboard the human ship, Zalarin was rushed to the medical bay. The doctors worked quickly, trying to stabilize the ambassador. Ethan paced anxiously, his mind still reeling from the events on the planet. He couldn't shake the image of Zalarin's broken body, the lifelessness in his eyes. It was clear that the Verlesian wasn't just physically wounded. There was something else, something deeper. A few hours later, the medical team emerged from the bay, their faces grim. Ethan was already on his feet. waiting for the news.
How is he? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The good news is that he's alive. Dr.
Luena replied.
But his spine is shattered.
He's paralyzed from the waist down. There's nothing we can do to heal him.
He'll need to rely on technology to survive.
Ethan felt his heart sink.
Zalarin was a leader of his people. How would he cope with such a loss? How would anyone cope with such a dramatic change? He's awake, Dr. Nerio, Luena continued. But he's not in a good place mentally. He's struggling with the idea of his new reality.
Ethan nodded.
He understood. The thought of being paralyzed, of losing control over one's own body, was unimaginable. But what was he supposed to do now? What could he do to help? Later that evening, Ethan made his way to Zalarin's room. He stood outside the door, unsure of how to approach. It wasn't just about the injury anymore. It was about the alien species, their customs, their beliefs. Could he even make a difference? He knocked gently and entered when he heard the soft sound of acknowledgement from within. Zalarin was sitting in a chair by the window, staring out at the stars. His eyes were distant, lost in thought. Ethan hesitated before speaking. "Zalarin, I'm sorry." The Verlasian turned his head, his face showing a mix of confusion and anger. "Sorry?" Zalarin's voice was hoarse, as if he had been crying.
Sorry for what? For failing me?
For leaving me to die? No, Ethan replied quickly, his voice steady. I'm sorry for what happened to you.
This wasn't supposed to happen. Zalarin looked at him for a long moment, his eyes filled with something that Ethan couldn't quite place. "Why did you stay?" Zalarin asked suddenly, his voice softer now. "Why didn't you leave me behind? You could have saved yourself."
Ethan's heart ached. "Because I couldn't leave you," he said simply.
"You're my responsibility now. I'll help you, Zalarin. I don't know how, but I'll stay with you. You don't have to go through this alone." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Zalarin's gaze drifted back toward the stars. He didn't speak, but Ethan could see the faintest hint of appreciation in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "I'll stay," Ethan whispered, more to himself than to Zalarin. "I'll stay as long as it takes." As the days passed, Ethan continued to watch over Zalarin. The Verlasian's condition didn't improve, but something else began to change. Zalarin started to open up. Little by little, he began to accept the help that Ethan offered, though he never spoke of the deep emotional pain he was experiencing. Ethan, too, was struggling. He had never faced a challenge like this. He wasn't sure how to help Zalarin through the emotional toll, but he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't leave. Not now, not ever. The Verlasian ship had been destroyed, and the ambassador was broken. But Ethan had made his choice. He would stay, no matter the cost. The two of them were now bound by something more than their species, more than their individual missions. They were bound by something deeper, a promise of loyalty, of friendship, of shared survival in the face of the impossible. The days after the crash were filled with uncertainty and exhaustion. Captain Ethan Markson had never experienced anything like this before. He had been through dangerous missions, had fought in battles, and had faced many challenges, but nothing had prepared him for the emotional toll of staying behind on a foreign planet with an alien ambassador who was now paralyzed and struggling to survive. As time passed, the situation became increasingly difficult. The human ship was on the other side of the galaxy, and Ethan had no way to contact them. The medical team had done their best to stabilize Zalarin, but the Verlasian was still weak and in constant pain. The gravity of the situation settled on Ethan's shoulders, and he couldn't shake the feeling of responsibility. He had made a promise to stay, but now the weight of that promise was becoming overwhelming. Zalarin rarely spoke. He would sit for hours by the window of the small shelter they had set up, staring out at the barren landscape of Veon. His golden eyes seemed distant, as if he were lost in thought or perhaps trying to escape the harsh reality of his new life. Ethan understood the feeling. The planet was cold, the air thin, and the days long. It was a world far from the warm, bustling cities of Earth, a world full of alien dangers and challenges. Still, Ethan did his best to keep things together. He spent his days trying to find ways to make Zalaran more comfortable, adapting human technology to suit the Verlasians' needs. He built makeshift equipment to help Zalaran move around the shelter, though it wasn't much. The alien's body remained weak, and the constant pain seemed to drain the life from him. Despite all of Ethan's efforts, there were moments when he felt helpless, unsure of how to help the ambassador with what he was truly facing. The emotional devastation of losing his ability to walk, his pride, and his purpose. One afternoon, after a particularly frustrating day of trying to build a new piece of equipment, Ethan sat down next to Zalaran. He had been working on a new chair designed to help the Verlasian move, but nothing seemed to work. He was exhausted, and Zalaran had not said a word all day.
I'm sorry, Ethan said quietly, his voice filled with regret.
I wish I could do more. Zalaran didn't respond. He sat still, his gaze fixed on the horizon. It was a view Ethan had become familiar with in the past few days, a barren wasteland of dry earth and jagged rocks. The planet was beautiful in its own way, but it felt lonely, empty. Ethan continued to watch the alien, unsure of what to say next.
You don't have to do this alone, he finally said.
I'm here for you. Zalaran turned his head slowly, his golden eyes meeting Ethan's. There was a flicker of something in those eyes, sadness, frustration, maybe even anger. Ethan had seen it before, in the way Zalaran would avoid looking at him when the pain became too much to bear. It was clear that the ambassador was struggling not only with his physical condition, but also with the loss of everything he had known. The Verlasian people were strong, proud, and full of life. To be paralyzed, reduced to depending on another species for survival, was a blow to everything Zalaran had ever known. I know it's hard, Ethan said gently, but I'm not leaving.
I'm not going anywhere.
For a long moment, Zalaran didn't speak. Then, in a soft voice, he finally said, Why? Why would you stay for me? I am nothing now.
I am useless.
Ethan felt a lump form in his throat.
You're not useless,
he replied, his voice steady but filled with emotion. You're still Zalaran, the Verlasian ambassador. You've done more for your people than most could ever dream of. Just because you can't walk doesn't change who you are. Zalaran looked away again, staring out at the landscape. I am no longer the leader I was.
I cannot fulfill my role. I am a burden.
Ethan shook his head. That's not true. You may not be able to walk, but that doesn't mean you can't lead in other ways. There's more to you than just your body.
Zalaran turned his gaze back to Ethan, his expression unreadable. You do not understand. My people look to me for guidance, for strength.
How can I give them that when I am broken?
Ethan leaned forward, placing a hand on Zalaran's shoulder. You're not broken.
You're just different now. You've got a long road ahead of you, but I'll be here. I'll help you figure it out. You don't have to be alone in this.
The words felt heavy, but they were true. Ethan had no idea how to fix what had been done to Zalaran, but he couldn't leave him alone on this alien world. He had made a promise, and that promise meant something. The following days brought no relief. Zalaran's condition remained unchanged, and Ethan continued to struggle with finding ways to ease the Verlasian's pain. But despite the difficulties, there was a small sense of progress. Zalaran started to trust Ethan more. He allowed the human to help him with tasks that he had once done himself, though it was clear that the Verlasian resented having to depend on another being. Still, the two of them developed a rhythm. Ethan would help Zalaran with his basic needs, feeding, cleaning, and moving around, while also trying to engage him in conversations that would keep his mind active. But the deeper challenge lay in helping Zalaran find a sense of purpose. The Verlasians' people were known for their strength, intelligence, and resilience, and Zalaran had been a symbol of that strength. Now he was reduced to a shadow of what he had once been. The thought of that haunted Ethan, but he could not imagine what Zalaran must be going through. The weight of his transformation, his loss, and his helplessness was far more than physical. It was a mental and emotional struggle that Ethan had never experienced, and it was impossible for him to fully understand. One night, after another difficult day of trying to lift Zalaran's spirits, Ethan sat beside him in silence. The wind howled outside, and the shelter shook slightly as the storm passed. The air was thick with the scent of dust and metal, but it was a familiar feeling now. The harshness of the world was something they had both learned to live with.
Zalaran spoke first. "I never wanted to be this," he said, his voice low.
"I never wanted to be weak." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He had no easy answer to that. Instead, he simply placed a hand on the Verlasian's shoulder once more. "You're not weak," he said quietly. "You've shown strength in ways you don't even realize." Zalaran didn't reply, but for the first time in days, he didn't pull away from Ethan's touch. As the weeks went by, Ethan continued to learn more about Zalaran's culture and the Verlasian people. He learned that the Verlasians valued honor above all else, and their greatest warriors were those who fought for the good of the whole, not just for themselves. Zalaran had once been one of these warriors, brave, intelligent, and respected, but now he had no idea where he fit into that world. His sense of identity was shattered, and though he was slowly beginning to accept help from Ethan, the pain of his loss was overwhelming. Ethan, on the other hand, continued to grow as well. He had never planned to stay on an alien world, much less take care of an injured ambassador. But his bond with Zalaran was growing stronger each day. He had made a promise, and no matter how difficult it became, he was determined to keep it. The road ahead was uncertain, and Ethan knew that there were many more challenges to come. But for the first time since the crash, he felt that he was beginning to understand what it meant to truly help someone. It wasn't just about physical survival, it was about standing by someone through their darkest moments, offering them hope when everything seemed lost. And in the process, Ethan was learning just as much about himself as he was about Zalaran. The days ahead would be difficult. There was no easy solution to the challenges they faced. But one thing was clear: they would face it together.